Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks once again for joining us today for our panel discussion. We've had an extensive month during the month of October as we go through the proceedings for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we thank you for being here with us for these webinar sessions that we've been hosting. Before I go any further, let me just pause for a moment of gratitude. To our Heavenly Father, I want to say thank you for this opportunity. I want to say thank you for life, thank you for health, thank you for strength. As we gather in such a fashion, I do pray that we will learn something new, that we will have a fruitful discussion. I pray that we will have no technical glitches to disrupt today's session, whatever I fail of asking. I pray that you fail not to grant it unto us. Amen. So the topic of today's discussion is critical infrastructure protection. And we will be looking at it from a Jamaican perspective. Now, we have a few members of our panel. We have returning guests, Chris Rickard, Chuck Cameron, and we have new persons a part of this panel discussion. We have Mrs. Carol Robertson, we have Mr. Roberto Suzuki, and we also have Captain Sydney Innes. Now, I do anticipate that we will have a meaningful and fruitful discussion. Now, just rules of engagement. If during the discussion you have a question that you'd like to ask, feel free to utilize the chat feature within this platform, or you can raise your hand and we will indicate when it is safe for you to open your mic and ask your questions. So without any further delay, let me quickly go through the introduction for Captain Innes, and then the others without an introduction that has not been introduced to this forum throughout the month will do an introduction of themselves. So Captain Sydney Innes, he's a retired naval captain and is currently the Vice President of Security and Safety for the Port Authority of Jamaica and the COO of Ports Management and Security Limited. He served as a commanding officer for the JDF Coast Guards before being transferred to the headquarters Jamaica Defense Force as Inspector General and subsequently as Colonel Adjutant Quartermaster until demitting office and proceeding in pre-retirement leave on the 1st of September 2015. Captain Innes initial officer training was as a naval officer at the Britannia Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, England. Initial staffing training at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich, UK, and a distinguished graduate at the US Naval Staff College, Newport. He has served on secondment to the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, Jamaica's alternate delegate of International Maritime Organization, and as a member of Jamaica's delegation to the International Seabed Authority. He currently is a member of the Jamaica Maritime Delimitation Committee. Captain Innes is a recipient of the Medal of Honor for meritorious service to the Jamaica Defense Force and is an officer of the Order of Distinction, a member of the Royal Victorian Order, and a Justice of the Peace for Kingston. Captain Innes holds a postgraduate diploma in maritime affairs from the International Oceans Institute, Dalhousie University in Canada, and holds a Master's of Science degree in Maritime Safety and Environmental Protection and in Government from the World Maritime University in Sweden and UWI Mona, respectively. He lectures part-time at Mona School of Business and Management and Management in International Relations and Strategic Security Issues. Without any further delay, Captain Ennis, feel free to take the form.
Mr. Hewitt, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I don't know what the protocol is, if where speakers are required to have their cameras on or not. Well, I'll keep it on for the time being. Sometimes I have issues with internet connectivity and bandwidth. So if it starts going in and out, I'll turn off the camera and just go by voice. I think the discussion is likely to be free-flowing, so I'll speak to what I understand as the issues that Jamaica faces in general, and a little bit more specifically dealing with the ports as one of the critical infrastructure, since that's sort of my area of knowledge and somewhat direct responsibility. But it is important that we all understand that there are a number of entities that we take for granted around us, which are critical to our well-being, and which, if disrupted, will have a significant effect on our way of life, whether it be temporarily or could be even more debilitating and for a more prolonged nature. And among the things I've mentioned, of course, our seaports, our airports, our power generating facilities, like the JPS facilities, National Water Commission. But we could also look in terms of our healthcare system, depending on how interconnected they are, and other facilities as Jamaica grows in digital sophistication. So all of the disruption of any of these types of infrastructure that we all use continuously is likely to have significant effect on our way of life. And the protection of these are, of course, absolutely necessary. Now, different entities within the Jamaican space are at different levels of development, different levels of sophistication in their use of technology. And this can be a good thing and a bad thing in its own way. It can be a good thing in that the less interconnected you are, maybe the less you are prone to cyber incidents or cyber attack. The downside of that, however, is that if your cyber capabilities are very basic and rudimentary, you also become a lot more vulnerable to attack from bad actors. And they can attack you in several ways. They can try to attack you through your, where you have, for example, supervisor control and data acquisition systems. And these could be through causing blackouts. It can be partial attacks so that they can demand ransom from you to restore your service. It could be stealing of your data. Any of these can be done. It could be just hacking into your industrial control systems to disrupt your operations. It could be from two ends, albeit interconnected. It could be from your IT systems or your OT systems. And especially in the critical infrastructure, your operating technology systems is where the attacks are most likely to occur. For example, if an attack was to be done on, say, the Petrojam refinery, it could take several forms. It could be an attack which could just disrupt their operations. It could be an attack that takes control of systems, for example, leak, open valves, spill fuel into the harbor, create other systems, for example, that could cause fire by overloading systems, overloading safety systems, and so on. The same could be done with our power providers, most of which are in the coastal zones of the country. In terms of the ports, it could be either taking charge of facilities on the ports themselves, the various machinery, the terminal operating systems, so they would have no idea where containers are. It could be taking charge of ships coming into the harbor, taking over their navigation systems, creating accidents, creating absolute mayhem. So there are a number of ways that the critical infrastructure could be attacked and are vulnerable. And before I rest and give the floor to someone else, back to Mr. Hewitt, I'll just mention a few of the more spectacular ones, especially in the marine space. There were hackers who were paid in 2011, 2000, and persisted through 2013 in Antwerp, Belgium, where they had penetrated the Port of Antwerp system for well over 2 years and were moving drugs, weapons, and all manner of things through that port because they had control over, they could say where containers were, what container was coming in, move containers around, get containers off the port, and so on. And it was only because of a shooting incident where a truck driver innocently took a container that was loaded with cocaine off the port, thinking it was legitimate cargo. And when the bad guys tried to retrieve it and tried to shoot at him, that it was discovered that this had been going on in the port for 2 years. The International Maritime Organization had their system hacked. Now this is a UN body. Maersk had the NotPetya incident, which I think most persons have heard of, which took out their system for approximately 8 days and estimated to have cost them approximately $300 million just within that short period of time. Other shipping lines, MSC, CGM, all of these. Now 90% of world trade moves by sea. So disruption of maritime trade can have serious debilitating effects. So you can understand the need to protect these types of infrastructure. Now, what can companies and governments, because any protection of these critical infrastructure has to be both by the private sector that operates these systems and, in fact, the governments as well, because it cannot be done. A persistent attack is very difficult to overcome without the assistance of the government that has generally a bit more heft in terms of being able to deal with these issues. There are several plans out there or best practices. Among them, of course, is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST framework, which speaks to ability to identify the kind of threats, protect against it, detect where it comes from, respond and recover. And there are publications out there which persons can use to protect themselves. Suffice it to say, the biggest danger that companies, governments, or entities in general face is complacency. And if there is complacency, it means that the technological issues are not being addressed adequately, the processes are not being addressed adequately, and persons are not being trained adequately to identify and respond to what needs to be done. And that maybe is the single biggest danger to the possibility of being made vulnerable to cyber incidents affecting one's entity. Mr. Hewitt, I'll now turn over back to you.
Thank you, Captain Ennis. We appreciated your opening remarks. Let me now hand over to Roberto Suzuki, and he can now take over. And following Mr. Suzuki, I will ask Mrs. Robertson to proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Port Authority of Jamaica, to inviting me to this panel. I think this is a very important topic, and I commend the initiative for bringing this awareness a month to the community at large. I think it's a very important topic that deserves a lot of discussions. Right. So I'll try to complement what Mr. Ennis has mentioned in his opening remarks. I think that I agree with pretty much everything that he said. There's a lot that we can take from what he said. I'll just add a few things that we can provide as far as supporting information. As you probably know, Fortinet is one of the global leaders in security, and we have been paying attention a lot more lately in terms of cybersecurity as it relates to operational technology and critical infrastructure, right? And that's because we're seeing that there's a lot more in terms of impacts as it relates to this environment, because as Mr. Ennis pointed out, the cyber attackers, they have realized that they can cause more damage, and in some cases they can reap more financial benefits if they attack the OT side of the house, the critical systems that make the organizations move forward, the core business of these organizations. So that's why we're seeing that more and more over the years, even in those cases where the cyber attacks, when they initiate on the IT side through, for example, through some kind of phishing, they are developing techniques so that they can move within the network and reach those critical infrastructure systems so that they can inflict more pain, right? And so we're seeing as of late, there's a new terminology that we're seeing that even is being used by the U.S. government. That's known as killware. That this are specific malwares that are designed to actually cause physical impact, and in some cases death, right? So this is something that has been dropped, a new terminology, and it's something that it's creating a lot of discussion whether or not this is beneficial or not to create this kind of let's say panic in the overall community. But the fact of the matter is that there is they are looking into that, and as most of you probably you've heard of the Colonial Pipeline attack that happened in the April-May timeframe this year, which kind of created there was no physical damage to the pipeline itself, but that there were some real big impacts, not only for the company itself. They actually had to pay the ransom, or they decided to pay the ransomware ransom, and that was in the amount of at the day of the payment, it was $4.4 million. It was paid in Bitcoins, but there was some collateral impacts as well. The company decided to shut down their systems, even though, as I said, this is one of the cases where the IT system was impacted, and they were out of line for 6 days. So you can imagine the losses of 6 days without transporting gas, right? And even that there were some real side effects in some areas where they were not even covered by this pipeline, because people were in panic, and they decided that they needed to fill their tanks, and so there was shortage in the gas stations, and there was price hikes, right? So this is just an example of how impactful these new attacks can be, and how important it is to look into how can we in general protect ourselves from this. Right? So just one thing that I wanted to add is that just a thought here why this is happening, right? So why now? Right? And the why, there are several whys here. I'm going to mention three important relevant factors that we are gathering from our own research, our own investigation. So one of them is the fact that the companies or the organizations that are involved in this ecosystem, they're actually getting more and more integrated, right? So what we had in the past, what we knew in the operational technology environment, networks that were considered air-gapped, right? These networks were isolated from other components in the system, mainly from the internet. So in general, the companies were kind of safe, or they felt safe because they were not connected to the internet. At least these systems that were vital or critical for their production lines. But this scenario is changing. Now we see more connectivity happening because of productivity, because we see a lot of innovation projects, Industry 4.0, digital transformation. All these are factors that are making companies integrate their previously isolated environments into more integrated environments, right? So this actually opens the door for cyber attackers to explore these new attack surfaces, right? So this is one of the things that we're seeing as far as overall trend. The other trend that we're seeing is, unfortunately, is caused by the pandemic, right? A lot of people had to work from home, work remotely, and this is also a factor that is impacting this whole environment, because we are now having to let people connect to their HMI, to their human-machine interfaces to operate systems remotely. So not all the companies or not all the organizations were ready for that. And this has opened the doors for some of the cases that we're seeing in terms of attack. The Colonial Pipeline case was one of those, where the entry point was the fact that there was a stolen password. Right? So this actually shows that the company was not prepared in terms of technology, but also it shows that this whole case shows that they didn't have the systems or the processes in place, and probably not the resources available to contain the attack. So that's another important thing. Even though we are a technology company, we always tell our customers that it doesn't matter if you have all the technology in the world if you don't have processes and resources to support that or to go along with that. So that's another key factor here to ensure that the critical infrastructure will be protected. You have to think in a holistic manner to implement this the solutions that we have available so that they can be effectively used. And the final point here is that we are seeing a lot more attacks. Okay? We have published a couple of months ago, I think by now, our report on our findings from the first half of the year. And just on the ransomware side, our stats show that in the period of July 2020 to July 2021, there was an increase of tenfold in terms of ransomware attacks. So that might be a correlation to what is going on the pandemic. Cyber attackers are trying to explore this new surfaces, but in the fact is that we're seeing a lot more attacks. So there's a confluence of factors that we're seeing, and it is justifying why we're looking into cybersecurity for OT and for critical infrastructure as a vital component here as we move forward. Okay, so well, I'll send the microphone back so that the other panelists can have a word here. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Carol Robertson, I'm the Director for Government and Enterprise and IT Solutions at Cable and Wireless, C&W Business. It is my pleasure to be here again, culminating the activities around a very successful Cybersecurity Month. And I'm very, very pleased to be a part of the discussion on securing critical infrastructure. It's a great topic. It's actually a refreshing topic, a refreshing spin on the discussions around cybersecurity. I'm not sure how many persons participating today remember 1985. I remember it, and you know, among all the memories, we may remember also that this was the year that there was the very first high-profile hack that it occurred in 1985, albeit that it was, you know, two journalists who gained unauthorized access to the British Telecom's Prestel pre-internet public online system, and as a result, they got into Prince Philip's personal mail. That's how the journey started. If we look back into, you know, fast forward a little bit to 2008, you'll remember that the United States of America was, you know, in what we were considering to be the worst financial crisis since the Depression in the 1930s. In that year, there was also the worst breach of US military computers by way of a USB drive. And, you know, that was introduced malicious code into the system. And it was also that year that the international debate on the cybersecurity crisis actually began. And look at us today. We are having discussions on the very same topic. And it's important to note that, as with all crime, but particularly with cybercrime, it's not something that you conquer in a day or conquer with any one strategy. It's an ongoing scenario that we have to continually pay attention to, because as quickly as we can mitigate risk, new risks emerge. And this issue of critical infrastructure, and with the fact that we're having this conversation on critical infrastructure, is actually extremely interesting at this time. We've seen where cybercrime has become increasingly more daring, prolific, and much higher stakes have been involved. Enterprising criminals have sought creative ways to make money, obviously, that's the motivation, spawn rapid development of new types of spamming, malware, ransomware, and denial of service attacks. In 2014, I mean, we at Cable and Wireless, we talk a lot about delivering IT infrastructure as a service. And there is that phrase out there, cybercrime as a service, where, you know, criminals are facilitating illegal activities by delivering services on the dark web, for example. Now in 2021, even in the discussion so far, we've heard the term ransomware mentioned a few times, but it is a common terminology now that, you know, back in 1985, we probably would never have thought of it, but it is a common and it is a present threat for everybody just now, and we almost are at the point of accepting its existence. When we think about cyber attacks, we easily relate it to the consequences, financial loss, reputational damage. And perhaps our thinking redounds to the large cross-section of society who are also experiencing results of theft, personal information such as banking details, credit card details, the theft of money as our ATMs have been affected, as our online banking has been affected. There's been disruptions to trade, the ability to carry out transactions online. The loss of contracts have resulted in breaches, or from breaches, I should say. And most importantly, there's been a lot of loss in the area of customer trust. So the costs associated with recovering from a cyber breach can also be even higher. They scale exponentially with the size of the breach. And at some points, it can actually be priceless. But now with these events, they're no longer hidden. So it's hard. Once upon a time, you know, companies would keep these events, try to keep the events private or not get public. But social media and just the way we communicate now makes it almost a guarantee that each breach is going to become public. And that results in damage to businesses' reputation. It continuously erodes customer trust. And it creates a domino effect that leads to loss of customers, loss of sales, reduction in profit, and the impact may also affect relationships with partners, investors, external suppliers, and even with employees. So we're now so accustomed to hearing about it. And perhaps many of us have been victims of it, or at least seen attempts, phishing attacks, you know, persons attempting to come into our personal space. We'd like to think that most of us understand the risks as we log on to the corporate network, as we surf the net at home. But there is still a lot of work to be done to secure the common access point, which is actually that space between the chair and the keyboard. And so it was mentioned by our partner, Fortinet, Roberto, who's actually is our partner. We work with Fortinet across our network and in a number of the services that we deliver. We've acknowledged the fact that there is that human element. And as we continue to work from home, as we continue to access corporate assets in a multitude of places, it is extremely important to make sure that the space between the keyboard and the chair is taken care of, educated, monitored, given the tools, and supported so that they remain aware. And we don't just assume that they understand the implications of what they're doing, considering the fact that our cyber criminals are constantly changing their behavior. Now, we're talking about critical infrastructure, and you know, the possibilities were actually highlighted in 2014 by Dan Coates, who later became the United States Director for National Intelligence. And he actually said that a major attack on cyber systems could shut down critical infrastructure, financial systems, communication systems, electric grids, power plants, water treatment plants, transportation systems, refineries, all of the things that we have just been talking about. And it could also have an impact on the US economy. Now, he was expressing concern for the US economy, but I submit to you, and thank you, Captain Ennis, you actually explained from your perspective and your engagements at the port exactly how it is possible, or how far reaching it would be to see such an attack on our physical infrastructure occur even in the context of the ports. And we haven't begun to talk about our utilities yet. So just as we in Jamaica haven't been exempt from the aspirations of cyber criminals, we have been and continue to experience cybercrime through the theft and vandalism of cable and wireless's own infrastructure that provides the transport for government, including our emergency services, our schools, large enterprises, the financial sector, our small and medium businesses, or even our entrepreneurs who are moving their businesses and managing their businesses online, and even the general public who we serve and facilitate their access to the World Wide Web and to participate in the global online arena to do business and access entertainment. This form of cybercrime occurs through the theft and the destruction of our fiber cables, our copper plants, stealing batteries from our plants, our mobile plants, our fiber operations, the equipment that we use to deliver our MSANs, the generators. Yes, we have lost generators that we use to power our plants in times of power outages, and that's been occurring for several years. But since 2021, we have definitely seen an uptick in the number of incidents. It should be noted that this happens despite curfew measures, in spite of the pandemic. But we continue to support all of our stakeholders in society, including residents, to bring a stop to this, because we are all victims of this type of cybercrime, particularly in the area of work from home and online school. We continue to engage the government, especially with the impact, given the impact of theft and vandalism on our national security and the economy. And we encourage the business community to become our allies and to add their voices to the impact that they are feeling when these events occur and services are disrupted. We continue, however, we've not relented and we're not stepping back. We continue to invest heavily in restoring the services when these things occur, both residential and business customers. And we are dealing with the increased cost in replacing the components and restoring the services. But the company has had to direct funds to the restoration efforts, as well as a costly asset protection program. So we have had to invest in our own systems and our own procedures to protect our critical assets, which are your critical assets. It should also be noted that directing funds in this way, though, also compromise our plans to deploy more services to sections of the island that does not have broadband access and do not benefit from the ability to access online services. It's also reduced our investments in being able to upgrade the company's network the way we had planned. There's a domino effect to everything. It's a major concern, given the fact that the customers continue to learn and work from home, so access to connectivity is critical. Vandals must understand that their actions affect everyone within the area in which the crime is committed, possibly even including their own families, their children, their friends. The cumulative incidents have significantly impacted the quality of service that we deliver to customers. When infrastructure is stolen or vandalized, residents are left with no access to contact emergency services, no service for personal entertainment, education, or research. They are also unable to communicate with loved ones. And in the commercial space, if there's no service to power e-commerce or online services, our businesses have a challenge. Businesses are unable to communicate with their customers, and many companies are left without access to power transactions through swipe machines, debit card, credit card transactions. Generally, the scourge of theft and vandalism negatively impacts the economy in a major way as businesses and communities grind to a halt without access to online services. And further, the vision of having a connected Jamaica is being compromised. So even with the scope of this attack, the impact it has seen is relatively low because it's not being clearly linked to the critical infrastructure. And it's not being clearly linked to cybercrime. It's not being associated with our endeavors in the virtual world. We don't have any nuclear plants. We don't have any of the critical dams or railways that were spoken about by Mr. Coates in his discussion in 2014. But it highlights that a targeted cyber attack on critical infrastructure is not implausible. And so we, as an organization, we continue to deploy fiber to the home, we continue to future-proof our network and reduce our vulnerability in the area. But we definitely need help from you, from the authorities, from the general public to help us to halt this particular element of crime among all the others. We're therefore encouraged to see more of our citizens speaking up against these types, because we are now having persons express and understand and see for themselves the impact of what is happening around them. In the same vein, as we have now gotten the Data Protection Act, we need more robust legislation to address crimes against critical infrastructure, specifically telecommunications infrastructure. For our part at C&W Business and Flow, as we fight our own battle against cybercrime, we'll continue to support the nation as businesses and citizens transition to adopting the Data Protection Act, including end user training, as we mentioned before. So now I can say that it's the end user between the chair and the keyboard. So we're providing the training, we're providing the support, we're helping businesses get ready for the Data Protection Act. We are providing support with their alignment of the policies and the solutions to protect their network and their information. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion. I thank you for listening to this segment of it. I hope you will accept this new perspective on cybercrime, because without a transport, we can do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki and Mrs. Robertson. We appreciate those opening remarks that you gave. Now, we also have online, which is a part of our discussion, Chris Record and Chuck, who has been in previous discussions, so they will chime in to the discussion as we get going. So a part of Mrs. Robertson's discussion, she made mention of the money that is spent into restoring some of the damages or lost to these infrastructures that companies lose. My first question to the panel is there a need to have a line item on the budget, on your budget, annual budget, for mitigation and or restoration of these loss of property due to whatever damages that it may cause, either it is through natural disaster or even nefarious minded persons, and what is that percentage looking like annually? My assumption that if there is a line item, that's an upward trend. What is that percentage looking like? I will start with Mrs. Robertson, and then the rest of the panel can come in accordingly. Mrs. Robertson?
Thank you for the question, Giovanni. Much appreciated. It's an interesting one. Should a company provide or create or add a line item in their budget for this type of disruption? I think that there are best practices, and it's prudent to be, providing for risk in its various forms. I do think, though, that as we are in this dispensation, we are now an online society. We are transacting business in cyberspace. So I believe it should be added, as it is another forum or an opportunity for potential risk. So in the same way that we would have assessed our physical infrastructure or other forms of risk associated with our organization and mitigated against that, in whatever way, through insurances or any other, it definitely probably is a good idea to start looking at this, because it is a forward motion. We're not going back to where we're coming from. We will not be just solely simply physical anymore. So I think it's a good thought for consideration.
If I may add, I agree. I think that as of late, we are seeing the offering of cyber liability insurance or cyber insurance. That's a thing now. That's something that insurance companies are offering. So definitely this is something that is happening. And I also agree with the one key point here. We need to think that cybersecurity is should be evaluated as risk, like any other risk that a company evaluates when they do risk management. So cybersecurity is one of the key topics that they need to think about, and they need to evaluate when they look at the overall risks within the company.
If I may, so I think companies have to go one step further. It's no longer left up to a company to ask themselves, should they have a line item? When you look at our Data Protection Act, specifically our Data Processing Standard number 7, it requires part of the obligations or controls data controllers must have in place is to ensure they have the ability to continue their service. So basically resilience. So it's no longer, before it could be viewed as a question whether or not a decision that the board may make. It is no longer a decision. They no longer have a discretion. the law now prescribes that you have systems in place to ensure you can maintain the uptime of access to data. So it's no longer a question. And segueing from the presentation that Ms. Robertson gave, she went down the road, but didn't say it. And just to bring it into the context of this presentation, a lot of our critical infrastructure is actually operated by private sector members. So a fundamental question is, whereas the government can roll out their own a standardized approach to protect our critical infrastructure, how do we ensure that those same standards or controls we're looking to put in place are cut across private sector, which operate a great deal of our critical infrastructure, either directly, as in the case of a flow or a digital or any utility that we depend on. How do we ensure that the same standards are met? And while the Data Protection Act is very narrow because it speaks to personal data, all these entities process personal data. So we do want to look at the Data Protection Act as a mechanism or a tool to ensure that we can raise the level of readiness or protection and come to some sort of standard. When we speak about, one example is, what obligation does a private sector company have to disclose that there has been a breach for the government to be able to learn from that and build out the requisite controls? So we do want to leverage the tools that have been afforded under the Data Protection Act. And if we were to appreciate that, we wouldn't ask the question, should companies now put that line item? Implicit in the Data Protection Act is that you have to put that control in place. If it is, you process any personal data, any at all.
I'd just like to add to what, support what Chuck just brought up a while ago. And he brought up a very good point as it pertains to the current infrastructure. A wide range of our current critical infrastructure are in fact operated by private entities. My own organization does work for some of these private entities. And as we are in October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, cybersecurity awareness training is one of the biggest factors to help reduce that risk. And I don't believe that the appreciation of this awareness is high up on the agenda of everyone. And I find that try as we might, I mean, this is all maybe third or fourth go around of some of these webinars. I know JaCIRT has been doing a wide range of them. But getting just the understanding of what this awareness is all about, you know, as I listened to all the speakers earlier, I started thinking about situations that obviously I cannot call any names, and I have to protect all the innocent and protect my customers. But there have been situations where, because this person is allowed to take home a laptop or a device, and they take home that device, and then that person has a child at home, that person's child loads on software to this device, it goes back to the office, then it's connected back to the network, and then bad things happen. And then that is where sometimes a door is open to access into one's infrastructure. Very similar to the case that was outlined earlier around a USB key being just, you know, dropped on the floor, and someone puts it in and it comes and brings down an entire nation sometimes, or a nation's attempt to do bad things with technology. And so just on the theme of this month, we have literally, I don't know, 3 days left, and it has to be part and parcel of the agenda going forward. As I was preparing for this, I took a look at took a look at a draft document that I just received, which is the National Cybersecurity Strategy for the Government of Jamaica, the 2021 to 2025 draft that my committee at the PSOJ, which is the Innovation and Digital Transformation Committee, has been asked to make stakeholder comments on. And it's a comprehensive review of what they've had before. This is an update on the 2015 document, and this is a comprehensive update. And I do realize that all the new initiatives, Chuck, including NIDS and our other initiatives that we have commented on, are in fact outlined in there. And so I am really and truly hoping that more people, both public and private sector, will take all this work that we're doing here much more seriously as it relates to cybersecurity awareness, and just shining a light on all of the fact that digital has brought more opportunity. Digital has also brought more risk. Yes, I do see awareness spotlight. There's a JaCIRT component in there with multiple sections, but we just received it and we're going to be reviewing it in my meeting, which starts with the committee at 2:30. So I'm just using that opportunity to say I'll be disappearing shortly as I jump into that meeting to make comments on this new draft. Thank you.
If I may, just to continue with what Mr. Record and other speakers have said, one of the significant vulnerabilities that increases the risks from bad actors in protecting critical infrastructure, you see, is the human element. If you go back and look at a number of the significant incidents, it's small innocuous actions, people not being careful, how they respond to phishing attempts and things like that, putting in you know, things in their work computers which they shouldn't, downloading from sites that they do not know, and so on. And this is really where it's one of the most significant risks. And it runs right across organizations. In fact, a lot of data has shown that senior management is significantly vulnerable. They are going to be targeted, of course, because they have certain privileges and they have access to certain types of data. So they're targeted, in fact, a little bit more than most. And they're some of the most vulnerable because they are just not aware. They think that cybersecurity is for either IT department or for security department in some cases. But it's a all of the organization issue. And it can start anywhere. Once a bad actor gets in the door, they can take their time and move up the scale through the network until they get to their objective. So this is really one of the things that persons absolutely need to be conscious of across the entire organization.
Captain Ennis, I'm gonna just really agree with you. I shared my little anecdotes around the space between the chair and the keyboard, and I quip about it, but it is undoubtedly very, very, very critical. And it's you know, and Chris mentioned the innocent. He's protecting the innocent, and by no means are we saying that these are cyber criminals themselves, but the job of a criminal, really, they consider themselves to be employed to study habits so that they can take advantage of weaknesses and vulnerabilities. The approach that we bring to the market, even in terms of just helping with that, when we look at our in-depth approach, and you're looking at all the possibilities at the perimeter, through the applications, through the core network, just as you said, having access, and as you become more senior in an organization, the more access you have, the more rushed and hurried you are, the more you depend on other people to read for you before you approve, perhaps. But at the top of the pinnacle of all of that is education. And that's something that, as I shared before, the whole area of cyber crime is going to always involve. As we mitigate, we have to monitor. As we monitor and we identify vulnerabilities, we mitigate again, and we continue to monitor. But the human element is no different. Monitoring, yes, putting all the tools to support, but the education. We have, in the last 5 years, perhaps, maybe a little bit more, we've transitioned from or to the knowledge worker. And we have given persons, roles have changed, and we have given persons more latitude because we want them to think. We want them to think about business. We want them to think about how they can differentiate our organizations, our products, our methods. And so having cultivated that person to be the thinker, we need not leave out or forget some of these things which we may think are fundamental, or we may assume that common sense will prevail because we do have knowledge workers. But you know that you have the old adage, jack of all trades, a master of none. We cannot assume and expect our teams, our colleagues, our entrepreneurs, our highly technical people to be cognizant all the time of all the emerging threats and all the ways that our networks and our tools and our applications and our environments are potentially going to be exploited. So we do have to give attention to all of the layers, all of the access points, all of the applications, all of the tools, whether they be mobile or fixed. But central to that, and equally as important, and maybe even more important because of the trends that we see, is the human element and the need to continually train and educate and test. Because we also think that we know the trick questions when they're coming, but we need to continue to pay attention to that. So definitely in agreement there that there is a need to give attention.
If I may, I want us to, for 1 second, move away from the individual. When we're focusing on the whole question of critical national infrastructure, I'm curious for us to explore to what extent has the government sought to put in place frameworks, or not even put in place, because frameworks are in place. To what extent has the government sought to implement frameworks that could satisfy themselves that private sector companies are indeed taking the requisite steps to safeguard the critical infrastructure that they are custodians or operate on behalf of the people of Jamaica? And again, because there is very little legislation that speaks to that, I want to hear the discussion around the extent to which entities such as the Port Authority that has third-party, private sector third-party companies coming on, to what extent are they requiring of them to show them that they have conducted a data protection impact assessment? To what extent are they requiring of third-party private sector companies to demonstrate to them that to what extent do we have data protection, data processing agreements in place? So there are some governance controls that could be put in place, because my concern is it's all well and good for government agencies to agree what they're going to do among themselves. But the reality is, even within the government agencies themselves that operate the critical infrastructure, they have third-party suppliers. What happens to the private company that comes in and cleans these offices? What happens to the companies that provide the ID for these companies, for these government companies that operate the critical infrastructure? So it's when we're looking at a framework and in the context of national critical infrastructure, that is, and this may well be happening, and I may not be privy to it, but we now have a regulatory framework in terms of the right to privacy announced in the NIST decision, and the Data Protection Act that makes it mandatory that data processing agreements are in place. And then before you share data with any third party, you ensure that they have the requisite safeguards in place. So I'm anxious to hear that I'm anxious to hear that discussion in terms of to what extent is the government recognizing that one, private sector operates a lot of our critical infrastructure, and to what extent are they leveraging the legal tools that are available to them?
Okay, Mr. Cameron, you directed at least one part of the question to me directly. I cannot speak for the general, the broad infrastructure landscape in the country. However, for the port facilities, of which there are in Jamaica 21 certified ports operating international trade port facilities, they go through a process where they have to present to the regulator, which is the Port Authority, their security assessment, which includes a complete risk matrix. After which a process of discussion and so on. They then have to prepare a port facility security plan. And in recent times, I would suggest only in the last 3 years or so, a major part of those plans have to include a cybersecurity plan, which they must present as well. Are they adequate in all respects? I am not sure. I would say that I think they, on the face of it, are reasonably robust plans. They're looked at by persons with some knowledge of the issues. But quite often you never know until you get tested, unfortunately. Certainly that was one of the things that happened to Maersk, because just the year before they got hit, they had made cybersecurity a major part of their security structure, a major part of their investment, in fact. And I think it was 2015, and it was right in 2016 when they felt reasonably comfortable that they were hit with this NotPetya issue, and all the way from Ukraine. So sometimes you never know, but one of the things you always have to be prepared, and a significant part of that preparation, which you have to put in place, is not just hardening your system as much as you can, but having adequate backups to support your system if it does go down and get penetrated. And also the soft side of managing such an incident, which is dealing with your customers, protecting their information in as much as you can, even after the fact, protecting their trade in many cases, certainly in the shipping industry, and assuring them of how you're going to get back on stream, and have your entire management cohort involved in the restoration process, with dealing with, as I said, with your customers and your own staff, and of course any third party provider of service which is going to help you, because chances are you will not be able to restore things by yourself. You're going to have to use some of the service providers that you use externally and so on. But you must have all that plan in place. Who is going to take the lead? Who are you going to contact? What are the backups that you have? And what are your lead times to be able to restore yourself? So those are some of the things we ask as a minimum that the ports are to have in their as part of their port security plans.
Thank you, Captain Ennis and Mr. Cameron for the question, and Captain Ennis for the response. We have Colonel Sterling with his hand up, so I am going to allow him to speak. I assume he has a question. Colonel Sterling, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Giovanni. Afternoon to the members of the panel and the members on the call. It's really more an extension of the response that Captain Innes has given rather than a question. The question will follow. But the specific example of Maersk and the challenges that they really, forgive the background, I am juggling between meetings. The challenge that they had really came about primarily because even though they had put significant plans in place, they had not really exercised them with the sort of thoroughness that would have caught some of the gaps that were there between the actual plan and the implementation of it in response to a threat that was actually active or an exploitation of any of the vulnerabilities. Now, with respect to the question posed by Chuck, there is the conversation, Chuck, that there has to be a different approach to how we treat with the critical infrastructure, critical information infrastructure space. What we have recognized as part of the review of the 2015 cybersecurity strategy and the development of the 2021 strategy is that there has to be a systematic enumeration of what exactly entails that sector of critical infrastructure. And then we have to look at what regulatory framework can be put in place that is not considered particularly onerous when we think about the mandating of reporting. And so to that end, we have currently underway a national cybersecurity risk assessment that is being done in conjunction with the Organization of American States and the European Union through Cyber4Dev and the Estonians. And what we're hoping to get out of that, having agreed the methodology, having agreed the base for deciding what consists of our critical infrastructure sector, is to look at how we move forward with that process. Do we put mandated reporting setups in place that companies like Flow, not picking on you, Mrs. Robertson, will consider to be onerous, and then they will just simply ignore it unless there is a significant challenge? Or do we, in the interim, continue to push the thought of voluntary disclosure of the existence of vulnerabilities or the occurrence of breaches and encourage the cross-pollination even within sectors such as the financial, the transportation, etc., with the use of anonymization and even the existence of non-disclosure agreements, but to ensure that there is that cross-sharing of experience and sometimes expertise. Because while one company may be good at something, they might be deficient in other areas, and the deficiency could be picked up by somebody else even within the same sector. So that level of cooperation, that level of voluntary effort to keep the population advised of the existence of vulnerabilities or the occurrence of breaches is a precursor while we complete the National Cybersecurity Risk Assessment, and then we will decide whether or not we need to go straight to regulations and legislation that mandate this sort of reporting, or we can continue and build and improve the voluntary nature of sharing that we hope can come out of this.
Thank you, Colonel Sterling. I know Chris has indicated that he has to go for a 2:30 meeting. So let me give him the opportunity to just give a closing remark on the topic at hand, and then he can leave. Chris?
Thank you very much, Mr. Hewitt, sir. Yes, as I had said in my notes, very important topic, great discussion so far. And I would like to, again, the main agenda that we have been focused on for this month is awareness. And every opportunity that I have, and I've gotten a few speaking opportunities is just going through this whole awareness training over and over again. My presentations, I've switched them around. I've started with just folks, please educate, not just educating yourself, because that is the first component, become aware, but also educate your family. And in a presentation I did recently for the Ministry of Finance, one of the things I explained to the team that was there is, folks, look, the device that you're using to transact, and I'm just talking here generally about cybersecurity, not specifically about critical infrastructure right now, but there's general awareness of cybersecurity and all the various risks connected to it, around whatever devices that you're using to handle any of your transactions. Be very aware of where it goes and who uses it. And as the example I gave a while ago about somebody taking home a laptop, what happens very regularly right now is it's a fair amount of transactions that are taking place on folks' mobile devices, and you now use that same mobile device to transact business online, and so then you open up yourself a tremendous amount of risk connected to your whole affairs as you go digital, which is also directly connected to the whole entire world here of critical infrastructure, because it is the very same persons that are now going into that office to sit down and then do the work. And as Carol said, the person between the seat and the keyboard is the one where a fair amount of focus has to happen. And so we support what the CERT is doing. We support what the various partners here. Happy that Fortinet is here. Fortinet is also a partner of us and a good provider of technology that we use to provide protection to our own organization and our customers' organization also. So thank you very much, and you have a great rest of the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We have a few days left.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate it. Now, a part of the discussion, and I like the question that Mr. Cameron asked about GOJ having the initiative where their external clients are concerned. What is that security looking like from their end, seeing that they're offering some level of service towards us? But then I need to ask another question, and I direct that question first at Mr. Suzuki and then the rest of the panel that's here, is what are the regulations within the different sectors like when it comes to protection?
Very good question. Thanks for that. I actually, that was something that I was going to share a little bit of our experience around Latin America and the Caribbean in general. We're seeing different levels of regulations and frameworks being applied to different sectors, right? So that varies a lot. What we've been seeing in general is that the energy sector, in particular, the electric energy sector, is one that is heavily regulated, and we're seeing the application of different flavors, if you will. There are some countries that are developing their own regulatory frameworks, and there are some countries that are following, they're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and they're using existing frameworks that are already in place. One example, probably in that particular segment, NERC-CIP is one of the frameworks that is more popular in general for the electrical sector. And we are seeing that countries like, for example, Colombia and Chile, they have pretty much copied these frameworks with slight variations, with slight adaptations to their own realities. And they have published those and set some timeframes for the compliance against those frameworks. And that comes back to, I guess, 2 points that are interesting. Comes back to what we're discussing about this implementing things that are, or frameworks or regulations that are too onerous, and that eventually they might not happen, or they might not be adopted or followed by the players that are part of that particular segment, right? So what we've seen is that some of these countries, even though they have set timelines, they have set deadlines for which these regulatory frameworks need to be complied with. We've seen situations where these deadlines have arrived and they have passed and nothing happened. Right? So this has to do a lot with the level of preparation that the agents that these players had prior to the development of this or the adoption of these frameworks, right? Because most of they try to be in most of the cases as comprehensive as possible. So it's not just a matter of data privacy. They talk about remote access, secure remote access. They talk about implementation of the right architecture. And architecture is one that happens to be very relevant when we talk about the risk that companies have, not because they're not safe and secure in terms of their own implementations, but because, as we discussed previously, we are in an integrated world where ecosystems they are heavily integrated. So we have to think about how secure is my provider and how secure is my customer, right? Because we're all integrated, and they can if one of the weakest links happens to be infected, then everyone is at risk. One example of that is what happens with the SolarWinds end of last year. It was an infection that came from one network monitoring vendor. So the infection came through in supposedly a safe environment. So that's why a lot of entities, a lot of organizations, including the US government, were impacted by this kind of infection. It was a supply chain kind of malware. So this shows how important it is to be as comprehensive as possible. But at the same time, if companies are not prepared or working through being prepared, then of course they're not going to meet the requirements in terms of deadlines and timelines. Right? So that's what we're seeing. And the other factor that we're seeing here is the fact that not even the government of those countries were ready to reinforce this regulation. So they were not able, they didn't have the resources to actually go and audit the compliance against those frameworks. So one has to think about that too, right? Because it doesn't matter if the companies are not in compliance if you cannot enforce it. So that there are several layers that we need to think about, and we're seeing countries that are more or less advanced in terms of adoption and deployment, and we're seeing companies that are more or less advanced in those compliances, right? But in general, we're seeing that there is work that is done in several layers, and sometimes it as at specific verticals, sometimes at a national level. But we need to think about viability of implementation, because it's not only the resources, you have to have the processes, again, the processes in place to make them work in favor of the overall health of the industry. So I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. Mrs. Robertson, is there any addition to that? Because I know C&W Flow, they also do have interactions with various sectors. Is there any security guidelines that you as an organization have to implement in order for you to be doing business with these various sectors? And if you can share, what is that looking like?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. I wouldn't go into the details of what they look like, but I would definitely provide confirmation and comfort that, remember, we also fall under the classification of a utility, and therefore we are monitored by the OUR. And so, among others, we are a regional and a global organization as you extend us into our Liberty Latin America or LLA and Liberty Global organization. So as we operate across the globe, in the region and in Jamaica, we definitely comply, report into, update various authorities, align with various regulations, even as we operate our data centers, where we deliver our managed IT services from, we also comply with regulations associated with the services that we deliver. One of the advantages that corporate Jamaica will have, and it particularly even our SMBs, as we grow the area of the small business and the entrepreneur, is that once we are aligned and we are governed by these regulations, persons who are using our infrastructure, using our environments, using our resources, also inherit the regulatory compliance and the certifications of our resources and our infrastructure. So there's definitely advantage there. One of the things that we did a few years ago was take enterprise solutions, corporate level or enterprise level resources, and make them available to the SMB, so that they can benefit and compete globally. This is one of the reasons our local SMBs are able to be so powerful in such a short period of time, because we've given them the opportunity to leverage pretty much the same quality of services, tools, applications, and infrastructure as some of your larger organizations, but we've scaled those offerings to suit the palate and the pocket of an SMB. So the answer is yes, we do have those considerations, we do have those compliances, we have them at multiple levels, locally and regionally. So yes, absolutely. As we transition into the area of data protection, we have also gotten ourselves aligned with the expertise to provide corporate Jamaica, large and small, with the guidance to get in alignment there for themselves. We're offering those services. We are a phone call away in terms of that. And the other thing that I'd want to say while my mic is open, and thank you for giving me that opportunity, is there are also, we're cognizant of some of the challenges that occur with the work from home environment and the exposure of corporate Jamaica to that work from home space, and the fact that the children are there and perhaps your son or daughter will grab your phone and start playing with it, and you don't know what happens after that. And these things can happen very quickly. The wrong press of a button can, result in many things. But we did develop at the beginning of the pandemic a solution that we fondly refer to as distributed workforce. And what that does is it allows us to extend the corporate environment to the home. So we're delivering a dedicated fiber-based or internet service into the home that is separate from the home network. It's configured as a corporate network, as opposed to the entertainment focus that you typically get at home. And it also comes with the attendant securities that are required in that space. So there is the firewall protection, the policies, you can get very advanced management in the space. But most importantly is that you also give your corporate administrators the opportunity to administer your environment while you are physically away from the office. So there's a lot happening to protect, to support the initiatives and allay some of the fears and create a progressively more safe environment. And we continue to invest in that regeneration, that transformation of even our services, so that we can, as a country, remain current and remain on the cusp of what is emerging on the digital horizon.
Thank you, Mrs. Robertson. To Chuck, I have a question to pose to you. And from a legislative standpoint, is there any part of a legislation or a legislation that speaks directly to critical infrastructure security and resilience plan? So is there any of that in place? And if that is not in place, where do we start? How do we get that going?
So I may have a myopic approach, but this myopic approach speaks for itself. If you were to look at the Data Protection Act, the 7th Data Processing Standard, it makes it obligatory for all persons that process personal data And because they use that word, it means that all third party, all companies process personal data. That's the first thing. So whether or not it's critical or non-critical. So because third party service providers to the government that operate critical services process personal data, they are also governed by the Data Protection Act. So that's the first step. So what that says, you asked a question about standards implicit in the 7th data processing standard. Well, first, it says that you must encrypt your data. And it will be foolhardy for companies in the financial industry, in the medical industry, only to encrypt their personal data. And when you look out in other industries as well, it says that you must employ pseudonymization. It says that you must ensure that the information is available. So that speaks about resilience. You must ensure that you do vulnerability testing. So we have legislation available that while the focus is data, personal data, it impacts entities that are providing critical and non-critical services. So while we may need more specific legislation, let us use the tools that we now have available that did not exist before. Companies that were offering information security as a service or managing networks, they never had a legislative framework or basis that made them relevant, because there's nothing compelling companies to employ any type of cybersecurity. But the Data Protection Act, they don't use the language cybersecurity, but when they say you must implement technical controls, when you say you must do vulnerability testing, that forms part of the gravamen of cybersecurity. So I would suggest that before we think about what else we need to do, let's leverage existing legislation, because never before did we have anything like that. And because any other legislation is not going to be tied to a fundamental human right, it is highly unlikely that you get any other piece of legislation that would be as far-reaching and powerful as the Data Protection Act.
Thank you, Chuck. So another question I'm getting is, are there information sharing and analysis centers to help critical infrastructure owners and operators protect their facilities, personnel, customers, or anything along that line?
That's a question for your organization.
and this is where I call in Colonel Sterling to assist with
that. Good afternoon. Seems though I can replace Chris on the panel, but I won't. The short answer is it's a work in progress, and we have to understand that when the idea of a digital economy was floated, there were a number of enabling facilities that needed to be put in place. The NIDs, the public key infrastructure, among other things. And one of those is actually the codification and enumeration of our national critical infrastructure landscape. Now, to enable that mapping to be completed, it really is going to take some time. Additionally, what we're going to find is that in an effort to put together a comprehensive resource that operators of critical infrastructure can utilize, it is imperative that we understand who really sits in that bucket. Now, when we analyze the different sectors that we have to be very careful that what we're calling critical is not really critical, just important. And where critical infrastructure is operated by companies that, as Mrs. Robertson says, as a really regional and global reach, and maybe subordinate to other jurisdictional requirements, there has to be that dialogue that takes place to ensure that what we're doing is not so bespoke that it really can't help everybody, but it's not so general that it means nothing to anybody. And so we're in that process right now. There is available resources that can provide guidance. The ICT division of the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology is one such. The Jamaica Cyber Incident Response Team is another. And if it's a law enforcement / legal situation, we have the Communication Forensics and Cybercrimes Division of the JCF, as well as the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency. Now, when you bring all of that together, if we are unable to help you, we have partners. We have the Organization of American States, we have the European Union, we have the US itself. And if it's a law enforcement issue, we have Interpol and the law enforcement agencies within our partner nations. So there is, in essence, a facility that exists. What needs to happen now? It needs to be made more structured, and it needs to be made more nuanced to the Jamaican environment to provide the best advice that we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Colonel Sterling. Let me say, I like the direction of the discussion that we're having. It's quite informative. I always do encourage that our listening audience, capture something from it. And these discussions, it's a way to take something back inside our various organizations and start working on diversing some conversations within our organizations. So as we are on the final lap, I will ask each of our panelists to give their closing remarks. Let me start with Mrs. Robertson to give her closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. Much appreciated. It has actually been a very, very good conversation. Thank you again so much for allowing me to participate. And I really appreciate and applaud the comments and the notions and the assertions that have been presented by the other panelists. And I do hope that the persons listening have gained even a little bit of insight and we've provoked some thought. I just reiterate, cybercrime, as we've been discussing it prior to today, has become a very common conversation. Most persons are au fait with its existence, even if they are not 100% sure of how to keep themselves and their organization safe, but that's okay. It's going to be a non-stop journey. As we see those attacks occurring and coming closer and closer to home, I will separate from the discussion by just reasserting that we are already experiencing attacks on critical infrastructure. I am, reasserting that the very, very networks that exist in our environment that facilitate access to the digital space, the digital world, have been attacked, and we all of us feel the repercussions and the brunt of it as we try to execute our duties, whether personally or for the organizations that we represent. So I will continue to make that plea that, persons here listening, go back, please help us to push to get the matters addressed and resolved. Let's report the issues. We do ask you to continue to be vigilant and give us that support, because we are here to serve you, and we are all in this together. As we enter into the more the focus on regulation and protection, and we've mentioned the DPA a number of times, I will say again that we're here with the expertise to support. Chuck has represented well the requirements in the specific context, and in response to the questions asked, we provide that support. We are here for you. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us and give consideration to the concepts that I've shared regarding the separation of working at home and the home experience, so that the corporate entities, and those who own businesses can take that extra step to keep your employees' environment safe when they are working out of the physical area. So thanks very much once again for being this being a great discussion. I look forward to hearing or even participating in many more, and I wish for everyone a great rest of day and rest of week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Robertson. Captain Innes?
Yes, I'm still here. Right. Just want to leave with our audience the fact that one of our peculiarities, or maybe it's not a peculiarity in many other countries like ourselves, but we're a small island nation, which creates its own vulnerabilities. Blessing in many respects, but some vulnerabilities are created as well. And one of those that we are dependent on trade, for example, for many things. A lot of our infrastructure, we cannot also buy certain critical services from anybody else. It's what we have that we must protect. Countries in Europe, South America, and so on, if their systems get knocked out, maybe they can buy it from a neighboring country, electricity, water, things of that nature. We don't have that luxury here. So damage to our critical infrastructure, and I had mentioned some before, can be devastating. It can have effect on our food security. It can affect our ability to just provide some basic needs. It can affect public health, our ability to continue commerce. For example, if we were to lose our systems to provide fuel, it can create environmental damage if it's done through sabotage and so on. Our transportation system, air, sea, or land, could be brought to a halt, and in general, our economy could be disrupted in significant ways. So critical infrastructure is something that is protection of our critical infrastructure is something that we must all be aware of and play our part. Now, the attacks will take many forms. As I said, it's from the basic phishing expeditions, which the cyber attackers use. And these, as Ms. Robertson said, these people are paid to do this. They are employed. So they sit down and just test for vulnerability, test for weakness all day. And once they get a foothold in, then of course, they are in your system. They also use exposed services. As more and more systems become digitized and interconnected, our own systems become certainly more exposed. And these expose us to vulnerabilities as well. We can still also remember that there's still the need for physical security. It can be somebody accessing the property, accessing your facility, and putting in a USB drive that is loaded with malware and leaving in a couple minutes, or dropping it somewhere, or just getting access to a computer that is left unattended for a few minutes, and they do what they need and they're out and you are unaware of it. So there's also that very basic need for physical protection as well. So don't forget that. And of course, the onward movement, where an attacker will get access to a target, and this could be external. The work from home issue has been mentioned several times before. So your computer at home, you interchange drives, USB devices between your home computer, your work computer, quite innocently, and so on. And that onward movement of a malware or some kind of malicious piece of software that is placed on that means, and then it works its way through your system when it gets into your system. So we have to be conscious of all of these and make sure that we are doing the necessary things to protect ourselves. Awareness is one of the most significant things. Mr. Record mentioned it several times, and it's something we must all take on board 24/7. Thank you. Just want to say, Mr. Hewitt, Colonel Sterling, thank you very much for the opportunity to have participated in this seminar. I certainly have learned quite a bit, and I hope others have benefited as well from the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Innes. And I'm happy that you learned something from the session. Mr. Suzuki, you're next with your closing remarks, and then Mr. Cameron.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I guess I wanted to close this this session from my standpoint. I wanted to kind of pivot a little bit and say that I hope that we haven't painted too much of a dark picture here. We spoke a lot about risks. We spoke a lot about things that are going on today, but I just wanted to reassure the audience here who are watching live or who will potentially watch it later that there's hope. I mean, now we are here, actually, companies like ourselves, Fortinet, Cable Wireless, and all the others who are involved on a day-to-day basis with cybersecurity. We invest a lot in terms of providing solutions for the community, and of course we also are hoping to get paid for that, right? So that's it's not only the other side is who's getting paid, we are also getting paid. So we are providing solutions that can help different organizations, and we believe that there's definitely a lot that can be done. I think the message here is we need to start now, right? We need to start by some point. There's of course there's no way to deploy a solution or an environment that is 100% secure. That's why we don't say that there's one single solution that will solve everything. Cybersecurity is comprised of a number of layers of security that will help you cover the entire attack surface, right? And I just wanted to kind of mention one thing that I got. Sometimes I mentioned that in some of my presentations. That it's not even ours. It is a paper that was published by Deloitte for the electric power sector, and it's what they call the Deloitte Insights. So in short, what the message is, after reducing your own cyber risk profiles, companies can collaborate with peers, governments, suppliers, and other industrial sectors to share intelligence, participate in practice exercise, and develop new standards and frameworks and pilot new technologies. So I think this overall summarizes what I think we as an entire cybersecurity community should be doing to increase our own level, our maturity level in terms of cybersecurity for the critical infrastructure. Okay. Thanks.
As usual, thank you very much for the opportunity to sit with the panel, and it's always a pleasure to, well, I actually had to take out my notebook and make notes because yes, there was a lot to learn. In terms of parting words, there are four, well, listening to Mr. Suzuki, I just added a fourth parting note. So the first thing is, whereas initially I moved away from the individual, I want to end with the individual. Each individual, if each individual were to take responsibility, one, for his own information security and privacy, and then treat the information that they are processing and take responsibility for that, and see ourselves as part of the framework of the critical infrastructure, because any one attack can come through any one device that we operate as individuals. So yes, that awareness, accountability, and responsibility for the individual is critical. Moving away from responsibility and accountability for the individual, we do want to, there must be this level of governance and making it now a necessary step for government agencies, not only to put on these sort of discussions, but leverage existing the existing Data Protection Act that mandates certain information security standards and controls that are prescribed to be implemented. So let us use the existing legislation. And thirdly, from a commercial point of view, it should reach part of the conversation when procuring, when seeking to bid for government contracts or big private sector contracts, that the whole question of information security and compliance with our Data Protection Act and any other agreed information international security standard becomes a fundamental part of any bidding process. And finally, following up from what Mr. Suzuki said, the legislation actually promotes the development of industry standards in terms of what works best in the financial industry, what works best in the medical industry. The legislation promotes industry players coming together, putting their own codes of practice together and submitting them for approval. Before we can reach there, however, corporate entities need to understand the risk that they are exposed to and the fact that they do have to implement standards. And the only time you can start thinking about drafting codes for yourself, you need to do it first and understand what problems you have. But we are still at the awareness stage of the journey. So it is critical that we have conversations going on like this, even outside of the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So thank you very much again for participating. Give me the opportunity to participate.
Thank you to our panelists. We appreciate the time and effort that you guys took to be here today. So on behalf of the Jamaica Cyber Incident Response Team, JaCIRT, and the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, we give a big thank you for your time that you took aside to be here with us, to be a part of this discussion, to edify our listening audience, those that are on the call or via the live stream. Thank you to our listeners, both on the call and on the live stream. We appreciate you and we recognize the time and effort you've taken us to be with us for an entire month. As we're in the final lap of the month, we say a big thank you to each and every one of you. There is no doubt in my mind that there is something new that you would have learned that has enabled you to do something different from a personal standpoint, to have an understanding when there are certain implementations within your organization, or from our technical persons that now I need to now consider implementing something new from a security standpoint with all the discussions we've had so far since the beginning of October. So we say thank you to each and every one of you. All of our webinars and panel discussions for the entire month, they have been live streamed and they are available on the JaCIRT Facebook page and also their YouTube channel. The name of the YouTube channel is Jamaica Cyber Incident Response Team, JaCIRT. And for the Facebook page, I believe they go by the same names. If you go on Facebook or YouTube, whichever is convenient, you can see all the discussions we've had since the beginning of the month. Just a quick reminder that tomorrow will be our National Cyber, the closing of our National Security Cyber Awareness Month. And with that, we have a cybersecurity activity in the form of a Capture the Flag competition hosted by one of our partners, Trend Micro, For those that are interested, registration is still open. You can check the chat and register there. I do hope for you a wonderful and a safe rest of the day. And as always, be cyber safe. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.